Well, I'm sorry it's taken so long to get another video out to you. We have literally had 2 to 3 weeks of non-stop rain in the UK. It's been really bloody depressing, and I was struggling to keep my normal chipper self up. This morning the storm's gone through. The last storm, Kiara or something like that. God knows why they've got to name these bloody storms. Anyway, it's gone through. It's left us with a beautiful sunny day this morning. All is good in the world. I'm feeling much better about it. And I've got my penis plant. Go on, tell me that's not the most phallic looking plant you've ever seen. This morning we're going to look at cheap Chinese shit stuff. Pretty much anything you buy, from the smallest kid's toy right up to cars and what I buy, woodworking machinery and things like that, it has got made in China in it. Sometimes it's just made in China and a brand you've never heard of. Sometimes it's a recognised brand and it looks suspiciously like the same machine you buy cheap in China. So are these brands buying from China and rebranding to make it look like theirs, or are the Chinese copying their stuff, as many of these brands claim? I'm not sure, but we're going to look at it today. We're going to look at the benefits of buying this cheap Chinese stuff, the problems with buying this cheap Chinese stuff, and the big problem, because there's a big problem underlying all this Chinese product that we're buying, and it's a big problem, and it's going to come back and haunt us in a few years. We'll get on to that. But most importantly, we'll look at the benefits that you can get from knowing what to buy, how to buy, when to buy. So let's get on with it. So, as I hinted in the beginning, is this stuff we're buying from China a knockoff copy of the stuff that some branded company has spent a fortune on developing, getting it right, and then along comes China and just copies it cheap? Or is it that China's making this stuff very cheaply, companies in the UK, US, elsewhere in the world I guess, are then branding it as theirs, maybe upgrading a few things, putting their name on it, or maybe buying it in a production run so it's the colour they want, etc, etc, and then passing off this cheap Chinese stuff as their carefully researched, developed and branded product? Or maybe there's somewhere in the middle. We all know that Apple and, well, I don't think now, I think that's stopped now, but a lot of these companies are making their tech in China. And at the end of the tech run, the Chinese have basically got the molds, the production system. They've got everything they need to then carry on making them. And they can make another X million of them afterwards, possibly not branded as that company, possibly even as knockoffs of that company. But given that they have the entire mechanism to make that, it's very easy to then go on and make it, whatever the legal agreements. I suspect a legal agreement doesn't hold a lot of punch in China. We can actually tell whether it's a knockoff copy or not. And the way you do it, everything is moulded, plastic moulding, there's cast iron bases that are moulded, and when you make the mould there's always a little join in the mould, there's always tiny little imperfections, there's bits you can find on that mould that mark it as being that mould. So if you take a machine that's branded and you look at the base, for example, I've looked at a sanding machine that I bought in the UK, branded, quite expensive, and the base had a very clear line where the mould went with a certain shape where the mould interlocked. And I looked at a Chinese knockoff and it had exactly the same mould. Now that means that the expensive one I bought was either the same Chinese cheap machine rebranded, or the Chinese had done a production run after they'd made the moulds for the company that developed it. Never know which, but you can tell whether they've come out the same mould or not, and it's always quite interesting to watch. So let's look at the benefits of this Chinese stuff. We all know what we're talking about here, talking about Alibaba and the websites like that. There are some serious benefits. The price you can't match. I mean, their cost of labour, their cost of materials, everything is geared up as a production machine. You can't beat the price. There's a few anomalies, but almost always you can buy the same thing for about half the price. That's a benefit, but it's got a drawback which we'll come on to as well. In my mobile office, I've got a diesel and electric combi water and air heater. In the UK, when I was looking at buying it, it was the high end of £3,000, and I could buy an identical unit from China. I think it was £800 plus some import duties and shipping, brought it up to I think about £1,200, so under half the price. Now I would love to put my cheap, call it a knockoff, we've covered that, next to a genuine Truma. I have a sneaking suspicion that when you look at those mould lines, you'll find it's exactly the same machine. If anyone from Truma knows about this, I'd love to hear from you. It's something I'd love to know. So I bought my heater under half price. It comes with, actually its support's not bad. I have actually contacted their support, and there's one lady you talk to the whole time. It might be she's the only one that can speak English, but basically she's very good. She comes back within a day. Their support's been very good, but they don't have the support network that a company like Truma has with engineers. You know, send it back, we'll just send you a new one, or we'll send somebody out to do it. You know, they have support that is what you're paying for. But I figured with something like this, at under half the price, this thing's got to go wrong a few times before it's not been good value. I think when I bought it, the price difference was nearly 3 times. So I think that was just after the pandemic. Sneaky suspicion they couldn't get their stock from China, maybe, but that's another story. So basically my machine had to go wrong 3 times, and I could have thrown it in the bin and bought a new one cheaper than I could have bought the original manufacturer Truma. Or sorry, I can't call you original manufacturer. Cheaper than I could have bought the Truma one. So there's a lot to be had from this cheap Chinese stuff. If you just want something that does a job, you don't care too much about the quality, and we'll come on to that in the cons, it's good stuff and it's cheap and it serves a purpose, but there's problems. Let's look at some of the probably commonly known problems of buying cheap Chinese. Often the quality's dubious. I mean, dubious at best. I've bought some woodworking equipment, you know, bandsaws, that type of thing. And you look at some of the guards and you think, well, that piece of plastic isn't going to last a month, let alone any long term. So there's definitely dubious quality problems. Likewise, you can't always tell what's quality and what's not. Sometimes it looks like good quality and you find out later that actually that motor will burn out in 6 months rather than last you a lifetime or even years that you would expect from a piece of equipment. And also things like drill bits. I've been trying to buy quality drill bits to drill through an RSJ. Just can't get them. They're all from China. They're all made of plasticine. They don't keep sharp. It's one drill bit per hole. In fact, many of the drill bits couldn't even get into the steel. And then there's the weight. I mean, a lot of these places, if you're buying off Alibaba, I think they quote about a month. In my experience, it comes in a week or 2 normally. Then you've got customs and things like that, which suddenly my £800 diesel heater got up to £1,200 with shipping and customs and etc, etc. So you've got to think about all those as well. It's not very straightforward. And that time element can be a big thing. So if you want to buy a tool to do something, you don't want it in a month's time. You need it now. You go and buy it. You're probably buying the same thing. It's just come through different channels. Then there's the big problem. And I think this is a problem that we don't always see. And the problem is the Chinese are flooding our market with cheap stuff, and the good quality stuff can't compete. They can't compete on price. People don't buy on value, they buy on price, and that's a big mistake. We'll come on to that in what, the tips on what we can do about it. And the problem now is that to buy a good quality item is nearly impossible, because the quality item manufacturers and producers have gone out of business, because the Chinese cheap shit has just flooded their market and they can't sell quality anymore. And that's a big problem, and that's going to cause us a very big problem in the future. So taking the drill bit, for example, I needed to buy a really good quality carbide steel drill bit. Couldn't get one anywhere. All the drill bits, they were the same Chinese shit, bought from the same place, bought by the thousands, tens of thousands of drill bits, and repackaged and rebranded. And honestly, it was like trying to drill with a piece of plasticine. So I hunted around, and nowhere could I buy a really good quality drill bit, one that's going to drill more than a few holes and going to last. And that will reflect across the entire industry. It's very difficult for somebody making quality items to compete with the sheer price difference that China has placed. But with that price difference comes that really low quality in many cases, not always, but in many cases. And that's the big problem, because in a few years' time, nobody will be making anything of quality anymore. We'll just have disposable crap. And unfortunately, that's not good for any of us, really. From every point of view, it cannot be good to buy washing machines that break after 2 years and we throw the whole thing out and start again. It's very short term, and I think there's going to come a time when we're going to realise that actually nobody makes any quality anymore, because China has just flooded us with this cheap shit. And that's the big problem. How do we benefit from this? There are benefits in this, and we need to look at it carefully. The main thing, and I have said it once before, we have to buy on value, not on price. So the difference is, has what I've bought been worth the money? Or have I just bought cheap and it will break in a week's time? Because if you pay just a little bit more, you could have something that's quite decent quality that will last you a decent amount of time. And that's what I mean by buy on value, not on price. And that's really the key. I think that's the key to everything. You walk around the supermarket, you can see, value bacon. It tastes of nothing. It's 90% fat. It's all torn up. They can't get the rashers apart and grill them properly. You know what I mean? Buy on value, not on price. Here's a classic example of value. When my kids were younger, I bought them from Tesco a cheap laptop. I can't remember how much it was. I remember thinking, fantastic value. Turns out it wasn't value at all. It was cheap. And the reason was, it was an unbranded, unknown product. It was difficult to get drivers for. It was difficult to therefore maintain and update. I had two of them because I had two kids and I was having to fix both their laptops because I'm in IT. That's the curse of being in IT, by the way. But the problem was, they were unbranded. Tesco had bought however many pallet loads of them. We'll flog them out cheap. Yes, they were cheap, but they weren't value. And the reason was, the lithium batteries, the laptop batteries, lasted 6 months, 8 months. Yes, you could turn up at Tesco's and say, this should last 2 years under the Sale of Goods Act and all that. You wouldn't have a leg to stand on, I'm sure. They might just give you your money back and now you've got a kid with no laptop. Every year I would buy another cheap laptop. And I quickly worked out, I think on the second year maybe, I worked out it was cheaper to go to the Apple store and buy them a really nice MacBook Air that was going to be supported. And that's the key. A lot of this Chinese stuff is unbranded, unsupported. You buy it, if something goes wrong, you throw it in the bin. And we've covered that, or we will cover it. I can't remember where I'm going to drop this in the video. And so I bought them two MacBook Airs. I think those MacBook Airs lasted 5 or 6 years. And in fact, I have a feeling one of them is still hanging around somewhere. They were absolutely brilliant. Yes, they cost me 2 or 3 times more than those cheap unbranded Tesco laptops. And I know there will be people who say, well, I can't afford that 3 times more, and I'm sorry about that, but that's just a fact of life. But if you can afford it, buying a better product, and therefore buying a value product, is a better choice. And the MacBook Airs was the best decision I ever made. It cost me, 2 or 3 times more, but they lasted for years and years and years. And my kids absolutely bloody loved them because they were fantastic laptops, not just cheap Tesco unbranded thing. And there's a classic example of my value versus price. You can also be a bit sneaky about this, so you can find the quality item that you want and then look for the cheap Chinese equivalent. I buy a lot of woodworking tools from a company called Axminster. Love the company, nice stuff, reasonable prices, great company. But if you look at their machines, you will find a Chinese equivalent, in many cases half the price. Now, again, don't know if it's the same machine or if it's a knockoff. I don't really care, to be honest. But you will find that. And there's sometimes a benefit in doing that. So you look for what you want and you reverse engineer it by then going and finding the cheap Chinese equivalent. Or maybe the original manufacturer, who knows. Interesting aside here, while researching this video, you might be amazed to know I do some research. I actually picked an Axminster sanding machine, drum sander, spindle sander I think it was, and I went and looked for the Chinese equivalent, and the Chinese equivalent was more expensive than the Axminster one. So well done, Axminster, but a bit of an anomaly. Normally you find it the other way around. Sometimes you just want cheap shit. You just need a tool that you're going to use for that one job. You don't care if it lasts. You don't want to store it. Sometimes you want to benefit from that cheap shit, throw it away. And there's nothing wrong with that. Classic example, when building my mobile home / stealth camper, whatever you want to call it, I had some polyvinyl piping. If you cut it absolutely straight, it makes a perfect fit. So I had to buy a pipe cutter. Very simple thing, like a big guillotine, pair of scissors, and I knew I would never use that tool again. I'm never going to fit those plastic pipes again. I don't want the trouble of storing it. See my decluttering video, Swedish death cleaning. I'll put a link in. So I just bought a cheap shit one, and I was happy with buying a cheap shit one. It only had to do one job. So there's times when you do want to buy just that cheap throwaway product. But there are many times when you want to buy quality. For example, if I buy a woodworking machine of £1,000 or more, I want the thing to last. I want the thing to not rust the moment I leave it in my workshop. I want the motor to be reliable and not burn out after 6 months. I want the thing, not a lifetime, but I want it to last a reasonable amount of time. In fact, something like a bandsaw you would hope would last a lifetime, but sometimes you want to buy that quality, and that's the time when you need to know not to go and buy dubious Chinese quality. Sometimes you do want to buy that. And this is why I say there's a problem. There's going to come a time when you just won't be able to do that. There's a lovely saying, it's worth every penny I paid for it, but I paid sod all for it. And that sums it up, actually. You paid nothing for it and it's worth every penny. Well, it's been a nice quick one this week. Wasn't by planning, just happened. It was a quick one to cover. So now I'm going to waffle on and fill it with all the bullshit that you're used to at the end of my videos. I'm sure loads of people have clicked off by now. So what's coming up next? My cat is coming up next. Thank you. So what's coming up next? Well, as I hinted in my last video, my role as a software developer had been with the same place for many years, came to an end due to a massive cock-up. There can be no other way of putting it. And I've left there. I decided I would semi-retire. I'd been planning to do it for several years. This kind of gave me the nudge I needed. And ironically, having left and done some other projects in the meantime, short-term fill-in projects, I've realised that my old role was actually like an abusive relationship. You didn't realise how bad it was there until you'd left. And actually I've really enjoyed doing small projects, a few days here, a few weeks there, and having time to myself. So semi-retirement is definitely on the way now. I can't afford to I could afford to fully retire now, but I wouldn't live much of a lifestyle. I'd be a bit skint. So I've decided I am going to still semi-retire. And what I need to do now is I need to just fill in a slight gap in the finances so that I'm a bit more comfortable. I don't want my car to break down and I have to wonder how I'm going to pay for it. I want to be reasonably comfortable in that. So I'm going to carry on working, but I'm going to change the way I work. It may be that I'll just fill in with the old work that I was doing, but I'll just take more time out in between, or more time out during the contract and take a week off for holidays and things like that, to have a bit more time to myself. Or it may be, and I'm thinking about this seriously, completely changing what I do. I've had a number of people offer me sort of jobs that I wouldn't even think normally of doing. I'm not going to say what they are yet, but there's a few people who said to me, oh, you should do this. You know, you just go into work, you come home, you don't even think about it, and it will pay you this much. And actually, that's all I need to top up that little gap in the finances, to be comfortable rather than surviving, fully retired. So I'll come on to that. I've threatened many times to do one on my retirement, do a video on my retirement, and I'll try and get onto that because it's a hot subject for me at the moment. You may have gathered from what I've said about meditation and things. I start these things, I do them for a little while, and then I tell you about them, so I can normally see what's coming up. And without a doubt, semi-retirement for me is a hot potato at the moment, and that's coming up. In 2 weeks' time, I'm off to Oman, somewhere I wouldn't normally think of going. My son lives out there, or has been working out there on contract for a while. I've been out before. I didn't think I'd like it. I don't know why. Some sort of prejudiced view. I thought I would find it, how do I put it? A desert. Not a lot to attract me. I got out there, absolutely bloody loved Oman. Beautiful, fantastic people, unbelievably friendly, nice, easygoing people. I thought there would be frictions over Westerners wearing shorts in public and things like that. None of that. They just lovely people, beautiful weather, really interesting country. So I'll take you along on that. I mean, we're going to do a lot of diving. We're going to do a bit of hiking. The weather out there is beautiful. God, do we need it. It's been absolutely dreadful in the UK for probably 3 weeks. It hasn't dried up once, and we've had storm after storm, rain and rain. So Oman's going to be nice. Definitely take you along for that. Be ready to be bored with too much scuba diving. And finally, a big thank you. I mean, some of the comments I've got have been so kind. When I first launched my initial introduction video, I was ready for the usual abuse you get on places like Facebook and things like that. Not necessarily from friends, but when you get these, I've got a local village hub. You put something on there, within 10 minutes you've got 50 opinionated idiots who've got nothing better to do than slag off people in Facebook, having a go at you. And I kind of felt that YouTube would be the same. I have been absolutely blown away, and I say that from my heart, absolutely blown away by the kind comments you lot have been putting. So thank you very much. So here's an anomaly. When I started this channel, Grumpy Old Man, I thought it's just going to be all grumpy old men following me. I remember cracking a joke about, you know, I'll cover when I grow my beard. That's one for you ladies, because I knew there would be no ladies watching this channel. And here's the anomaly. 90% of my viewers from Google Analytics, 90.1% of my viewers are female. Well, I tell my friends it's because I'm such good eye candy, but the reality is my episode on Swedish death cleaning happened to land at exactly the right time, with a newspaper in the UK doing an article on Swedish death cleaning. It was a very fashionable topic. Never have I been fashionable before in my life. And it just hit, and I mean, I think we're on about 9 or 10,000 views on that now. And of course, I suspect my 90% female viewing is not because I'm fantastic eye candy. Honestly, I'm not that vain, or even the fact that I have a penis plant. I suspect it's due to my Swedish death cleaning. Either way, the comments have been fantastic. You lot are so kind, and it's really nice to see the channel gradually building up, and I've really enjoyed doing it, and I'm continuing to enjoy it. But a big thank you to those of you that have subscribed and those of you who have put kind comments, because honestly I was expecting to get an absolute slating. I'm sure it'll come. Perhaps we'll name and shame the first person to give me a bad time in the comments. Look forward to seeing you next time. So what's coming up next? My cat is coming up next. Thank you. Analytics, audience, age and gender. Oh my God, I don't believe it. So here's an anomaly.